Everyone today? Good? All right. So thanks for coming to the chairman's chat. People are going to come in and out. So what we're going to do is we have a great panel here for you today for you to ask questions to. We have some representatives from teams as well as judges. I hope you all brought your best chairman's questions that you could possibly have. So what we're going to do is we're going to alternate. We're going to have you ask questions for a team, and then we'll have you ask questions for a judge. We don't want to inundate our awesome judges that so kindly came to spend their time here right now too much. And then when we're done, if you still have a little bit more questions, some of our panelists will stick around so you can ask them. Some of our team leads may have matches to get to. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Kathy Beck from Team 103.
I'm Kirsten Jan Richardson from 341 Miss Daisy.
Daryl Newhouse from Los Angeles, Team 597.
Kelly Van Antwerp from Wildstang 111.
Karthikeyan Sabapthi, Team 1114 Symbotics.
Bill Garfield, I'm a judge advisor and a chairman's judge at this event.
Ginny Cornyn, chairman's judge at this event.
Mike Gentry, Team 236, Technotix, Old Lyme, Connecticut.
Awesome. So we will start with a team question. Before I start, I'd like to congratulate 987 last year for winning chairman's here and entering our Hall of Fame, as well as 3132, who earned the Chairman's Award at Houston last week. Can't wait to see what team we induct to the Hall of Fame from St. Louis in the next couple of days. So I just ask that if you have a question at all, just throw up your hand and I'll come find you and we'll ask a question. So who has questions? Oh man, guys, you gotta have questions. All right. You have to think of really good questions, otherwise we have no forum. Yep, I'll come to you next, hang on.
We can move. From essay, the executive summary presentation, and then PIT questions, how heavily are each of them weighted when it comes to making the decision? Which one do you scrutinize the most?
At least in my experience, we don't scrutinize questions, we don't weight questions. We read the entire set of questions, the entire essay, and we take the presentation into account, and then we do a discussion. So it's not a point system, it is a how well did you address each question and how well did you describe your process in your essay.
If I understood you correctly, you asked about PIT interviews, was that right? Yes. Actually, the Chairman's Award judges do not consider PIT interviews at all. We strictly look at the essay and the presentation you make.
I think that's a really important point to remember, and I think it's something that a lot of teams are unaware of. I think it's almost a misnomer, and we were talking about this morning when all the Hall of Fame teams met. There's a lot of rumors or just ingrained beliefs about the Chairman's Award, and I think it's really important that you ask all the questions you have now, and we can shoot as many of those down as possible or confirm them if they happen to be true.
Awesome. Next question, we'll try and direct this one towards the teams. Do you have a question?
So my team is in its second year now. Next year is our third year. We're planning on applying for the Chairman's Award, not planning on coming anywhere close to winning. But what kind of advice would you give to a team that's just starting the Chairman's Award process?
I think it's really important to remember that every team has their own story. So even for a team who will only be in their third year, you still have a lot to share with the judges. But that being said, it's important to stick to what makes your team special. There's lots of things that teams do, but it's not at their core. The judges want to hear about what you are the best at and what's special and unique about your team. So even if you're just a third-year team, find those things that your team is most proud of, and that's what you really want to focus on.
I think one of the really unique things you can do if you're starting out as a young team applying for Chairman's Award is starting to get your team metrics. Start getting all the numbers associated with the things that you're accomplishing and make sure you retain them and keep updating them through the years. So 10, 15 years from now, you don't go, oh my goodness, how many teams do we sponsor in 2017 versus 2020?
My best advice would be make sure you document everything. So someone just alluded to that. So the number of teams that you started, your community outreach, your volunteering, how diverse is your team, and give the judges something to measure. Like, we started here, and today now we're here. You know, we started with 5 people. Now we've got 50 people on our team in 3 years. So the more you can document this, that really helps the judges make their decision.
Okay, next question.
In my experience, a lot of like the things that they look at when it comes to outreach, it's more of an impact. Like you're talking about numbers and how many people attended to your events or things like that. But when it comes to something being more impactful, it may not be numbers. So how do you kind of show the judges that you've made an impact, but it's not like by how many people you've done, but more like the quality of your work?
Well, you hit on a very good subject, because often the presentations and the essays do address, we've touched 10,000 people, or we've touched 100,000 people, and yet it's very hard for the judges to know what the quality of that impact was. And it's incumbent, I suppose, to some extent upon the presenters to tell us how it made a difference. The judges really want to know what makes you different, what sets your team apart. To be honest, almost every team that walks in the door for a chairman's presentation is going to say, we had a public outreach, we've had community involvement, we've been spreading the word of FIRST. And that's great. But the question becomes, how has your team achieved results that are better, more efficient, more impactful than the next team that comes in the door? And that philosophy can be extended to a lot of things, not just your public outreach. Almost all teams mentor FLL teams or FTC teams. Many teams now have legislative agendas or involvement with their school board. Those kinds of statements, while they're great activities, are not unique. And the judges are really listening for, what did you do that's bigger, better, faster, more unique, more effective? So quantifying the results to the best you can is always something that's desirable.
I agree with what Bill said. I think the other thing about the Chairman's Award is it's how well-rounded are you? Is your outreach both to help FIRST and help your community? Is your work with teams just you show up and do a flyby, or are you actually working with the kids and mentoring the kids? So I think it's a combination of breadth and depth. And so how you can portray that in your writing and then in your presentation is important.
Okay, great. We're going to direct the next question towards some of our teams.
When deciding what you want to put in your chairman's presentation, what's the first thing that your teams typically look at?
What is unique and what sets you apart? I mean, the judges just talked about that, but you want to look at what your team is best at, what your team is known for, and what makes you unique. Like, think about this award. The Chairman's Award, one of the things they talk about is a team that is a role model and best exemplifies the mission of FIRST. So you want to find the mission of FIRST is multi-pronged. So you want to find the things that you do best and really highlight that. I think a lot of teams try and hit every single area and almost as if it's a checklist, but I think it's more important to go in depth about what you're good at. The jack of all trades can be the master of none.
Also, the idea of, if you think about what's been said and what is said in the write-up that FIRST gives us on what a Chairman's Award is about, it's about changing culture. So getting to the point of competing and being involved in a Chairman's Award activity, like life, is a journey. So what impact does that journey have on your team? So tell personal stories. Tell how your team has changed. A second-year team, identify what your culture is. Is your team and your school an atmosphere of openness and supportiveness? I work with a lot of First Lego League teams, and the one thing I notice is when they're younger, some people are afraid to try great things because they're afraid of failure. As you get older, you find out that a lot of things, and engineering in particular, is all about failing fast and failing often. So incorporate that if that's your personality. As Karthik said, you have to figure out what your story is. And if you're successful in telling that, the judges will know. The judges will recognize it. The thing about Chairman's Award judges is they are as empathetic as anybody, and there's a bond that comes between the judges and the students. And it's amazing how good the students feel when they come out of the room, no matter what happened in the room. And I give a lot of credit to the judges at the Chairman's Award.
You can also, just to bank off of what Bob said, you can talk about what you've done to change the culture of your school, of your community, local, and also globally. Have you done anything? Did you do any outreach? Those are the things that you really want to focus on. And if you're not really sure, and if you're not doing things to change the culture, then reassess what you are doing and why you're doing it. Okay?
The one other thing, and then maybe it goes without saying, but I think it actually doesn't go without saying. The first thing you should be doing is reading through the awards description and guidelines. I think a lot of teams have a fundamental misunderstanding of what's said in there. Read it, highlight it, figure out what the award is exactly asking for, and base your things around that. It's the same thing with the game every year with the robot. A lot of teams just start building a robot based on what they saw in the animation or what they heard on kickoff. It's actually important to go through the rules and analyze them. You want to do the exact same thing with the Chairman's Award. You're building towards a specification, so you must fully understand the specification.
Okay, real quick, I'm going to give you my personal experience. Team 597, we won the Chairman's Award in 2015 here in St. Louis. Wonderful experience. We've been around 17 years, so it was our 15th year that we won the Chairman's. And what we had to do was we really had to do a self-assessment of ourselves. And I have my Boeing engineer over here, and he had a friend that was a Hollywood producer. And this person came into my school. We sat down and we looked at all the things that we had submitted for chairmans. And this producer says, you got to think of this as a Steven Spielberg thing, the 20-second elevator story. You're in the elevator with Steven Spielberg, and you're trying to pitch a movie to him, and you say, Steven, I got this movie I want to pitch to you. And he says, you got 20 seconds to tell me your story before I get off on the 5th floor. And we kind of took that approach. So instead of it's already been said, everybody does a lot of great things. But you want to make it easy for the judges, make it easy on the judges. So we picked 3 things. We said we were a family, we volunteer, and we love to share whatever resources that we had. And the emphasis that we put on was sharing resources with our community, with FIRST, and on a global level.
Awesome. All right. Let's take a question over here for some of our judges. Anyone have a question over here?
Just a clarification. So the questions that are asked in the pits, they have no weight in the award?
That is correct. The judges that come to the pits are judging other awards. There are 15 awards given out by the judge team, the blue-shirted judges, and the Chairman's Award judges are looking at the essay and your presentation only. Trust me, there are times when we wish we could go back to the pits and ask follow-up questions or even talk to the other judges, but we don't do that. We don't even talk to the other judges about the pit interviews. So your presentation has to, and your essay need to stand alone to tell the story of your team, your journey, and your accomplishments. And it is really a self-contained presentation.
And if you see chairman's judges in the pits, it's because we're helping on other awards. So like you will see chairman's judges in the pits today because we don't start chairman's judging until tomorrow. So the fact that we're there on Thursday doesn't mean it's about chairman's award. It means it's about other awards that we're helping out with.
Great. If our latest panelists could please introduce themselves. Double microphone. No, it's okay.
Okay, she doesn't want to introduce herself. This is Ruth Kamen.
Great. So we're going to take another question. We'll direct it towards a team.
Hi, so I'm really kind of new to FIRST, and I don't have a good scope of the resources and stuff that you guys provide. What resources do you provide for current year teams on what teams have done to win the Chairman's Award in the past?
So there's a wide variety of resources out there. So I recommend you start is on the Chairman's Award page on the FIRST website. There is a link to past Chairman's Awards, including the submissions from the past few teams who won at the championship, and every single submission for a team that won at a regional or district championship event this season. So that's a great place if you're just looking for general information. There's also a presentation made by Team 1114 on that website about the Chairman's Award, as well as sample judges' questions that were curated by Team 27.
We don't bite. You can come and ask. It'd be pretty great. So if you're wandering, I know someone said it earlier this morning, if you're wandering around the pits, there's a bunch of gold stars chilling over our pits. Come and find out and ask us about what we do, because the kids would love to talk to you. If you're a little not wanting to come talk to us in the pits, feel free to go to any of our websites. You can just Google us, look us up on that page that Karthik was talking about, and reach out, because we all offer a bunch of resources to teams within FIRST to make sure that you guys are all able to someday win a Chairman's Award, because every team is a Chairman's Award team. It's just there's only so many that can win. So just build yourself up and do it up and practice. And if you need help with anything, reach out to your closest team or the team that you kind of get along with the most.
On Team 341's part, we posted our video, obviously, which is pretty standard, but we also wanted to document our actual presentation from that year because we thought it was pretty special for our team. So we actually have a video online as well of our entire presentation, so if you were actually in the room, like what the judges would have seen. Other than that, I mean, we don't have like a slew of resources online, but we are always willing and able to talk to people, and we have done some both near and far, you know, mentoring or like reviewing of videos and reading of essays and stuff like that. So.
Okay, we have another team question right here.
As Chairman's Award, oh my God, sorry, microphone. As Chairman's Awards become more globalized, like with teams from out of the country participating and teams within the country starting other teams out of the country, how can a more localized team win Chairman's if they don't have that expanse or outreach, or at least people on the ground in those foreign places?
So I think that there's a lot of people out there that think that you have to travel to another country to win the Chairman's Award and help other countries, but the award is about spreading FIRST and spreading Grace's professionalism. So if you kind of look around you and you look in your general area or other areas of the country that need help and need help starting STEM teams, if you see a school in your area that might not have the funding to start a team, get them up, bring them on your team, help them out, and just look for places that need STEM. Look for places that need robots. Look for places that need students that care. And that's how you're going to win the Chairman's Award.
A lot of communities, if you look in the local newspapers, have missions to other countries. They have missions to Haiti, to Central America. So expand your outreaches, and I'm sure that within your high school there are students who are members of local groups, churches, or whatever, who have trips to these other countries. Take a box of Lego pieces with them and start with little kids. I mean, the fact that FIRST has gone to ever younger and younger ages actually in some ways makes it easier, because It's very easy to start an FLL junior team anywhere because the financial resources are so small, and there's a lot of information available at First and on other teams' websites about how to do workshops and how to do things like that. It's a start, and then you'll see where, I mean, on our team, we started because we had a summer program. One of the churches had a summer program with kids from the Middle East, and they were a dance troupe. And we brought them in, and they showed some of our kids how to dance. Now, it so happens we have a thing called the tick dance that we do, and we showed them how to play with robots. And they left with a robot kit that we gave them. That might have been a deviation from federal policy on software release, but anyway. And that's how it started. So that started a partnership that just grew. So little steps, and then they grow big.
Excuse me, I know that was a team question, but as a judge, I just kind of have to weigh in on this. At the outset of this meeting, we talked about dispelling myths, and this is one of them. If there's a perception that you have to have involvement with an international team to be considered for Chairman's Award, that is not true. First is nowhere close to saturation in your backyard, and there's always an opportunity to be just as effective locally as internationally. It's true that a lot of teams do have contacts in other countries, and honestly, it becomes a little bit difficult for the judges to determine how effective those contacts really are, or what the depth of the contact is. It's much more easy to quantify local involvement. So don't feel like you have to do that. That is not a judging criteria.
Okay. Now, I can talk from the inner city perspective. Where we're at, Los Angeles, South Central, one of the one of the crime-ridden areas in our country. We've never traveled to China or Israel or any of the other places. So as far as global outreach, a lot of our kids are Hispanics, and a lot of the kids are undocumented, but they have their ties to Mexico and Central America. And what a lot of these kids have done was they've used Facebook, they've reached out with social media to a lot of these schools. What is that, Skype? To a lot of people that wanted to start teams in Mexico. So my kids would Skype with them and tell them the pros and cons, and occasionally offer them advice as far as like your business plan, how does that work? Or whatever it is that thing that or questions that they had. So you don't necessarily have to leave the country to have a global impact on someone.
Okay, great. We have a question here for our judges.
I was curious. I kind of was under the idea that engineering inspiration is a runner-up to chairman's. Is there a different criteria between engineering inspiration and chairman's?
Another myth to break. Engineering inspiration is not a consolation prize for chairmans. It is about engineering the engineering process, helping promote the field of engineering. Are there components of that that can be in chairman's? Yes, but the two are not the same.
This question actually came up in Houston, at the Chairman's Chat in Houston, and it's, I think, a common problem. And I will tell you what I told the group there, is that sometimes the judges have trouble telling the difference. So don't feel bad. But yes, it is important that we understand the difference, that engineering inspiration focuses on excellence in engineering and promoting engineering. The Chairman's Award is about the vision of FIRST and how your team is promoting both FIRST and STEM and the values of FIRST in your community and your school. One way to think about it is that almost all of the awards that the judges give have an analog to the business world. As an example, the Imagery Award has an analog to how a corporation may brand itself. EA has an analog to how a company may run itself financially, and so on. You might think of engineering inspiration as how you run your engineering department. You may think about the Chairman's Award as how you run your team as a business and the culture that you create in your business.
Okay, great. We have another question over here for everyone.
So I just had a question about the presentation itself. Do you prefer more of a professional looking presenters coming in with suits and ties and all this? Or do you prefer more of a gimmicky kind of thing where it kind of ties around the presentation, or doesn't it matter?
I've been answering this question for a few years now, and I think what really matters is that you're true to your team identity and the comforts and strengths of your presenters. If you try and put normally a buttoned-up kid, in a costume or a cape, they're going to hate it and they're not going to do a very good presentation. If you take the kid who always wears capes at competitions and try and put her in a dress, she's going to hate it. So you really need to play to the strengths of your presenters. The comfort level in the room is really what matters. And so I think, especially with teenage boys, you toss them into a suit and they stiffen up. They tense up. So many of them cannot handle it. So you don't necessarily want to do that. I don't think I'm not going to speak for the judges, but I don't think any judge has ever decided the Chairman's Award based on what the students were wearing.
I think what's important about the presentation is that it has to be a presentation of your team. You know, there are some presentations that come about and it's very entertaining, yet at the same time they're not really talking to us and we really can't see or hear or really get a grip of really what your team is about. And the whole thing about Chairman's is that it's this whole global piece of what your team is. It's every single aspect of it put together in this one award. And so that's what you have 7 minutes to present. And if it's done in a very modified way, but not in I don't mean negative in that way at all, but if it's just more of like factual kinds of things, more like bullet points, but you own it, and that it's your team. This is what we really want to see, that it's not just this whole memorized speech that everybody looks like, deer with floodlights in their eyes, and that's not the point. The point of it is like, how can you teach us what your team is about? What have you done in these last 5 years, and what have you done in this year? What do you want us to walk away with, that when we walk away we go, wow, and not because you did a Broadway spectacular?
I think another piece is it needs to be personal. It's wonderful to have a video and a PC sitting there, but we want to talk to you and we want to hear from you. We don't necessarily want to hear videos, and I know that may not be true of everyone, but your sincerity and integrity, which is essentially what Ruth was saying, about your team process, who your team is, what you believe in, what your team values are, is the most important element in the room.
I guess this discussion started with a question about what the presenters were wearing, and it's kind of morphed into something bigger and actually more important than that. Let's be clear. Let me be clear. There is no judging criteria for the presentation. The judging criteria is completely focused on the message, the story of your team, your journey, your successes, and how you've impacted the culture of First. Why do you want your presentation to be well put together? Because we're expecting teams at this level to have a very professional delivery. You want your presentation about your team to be memorable, hopefully in a positive way. Okay? And because of that, I don't know of any judges who care if you're wearing a coat and tie or your normal team wear, whatever you choose. But you should consider how you look as a team of presenters. And let me tell you a very quick short story. A few years ago, we had 3 presenters come into a room. They were all wearing exactly the same thing. They were wearing Dockers, white blouse, and for the white shirt for the young man. The 2 young ladies, their slacks were perfectly creased. Their blouses looked like they just walked out of a dry cleaner. The young man standing next to them was wearing the same clothes, and he looked like he had slept in those clothes. There was not a square inch on his body that wasn't totally wrinkled. Now, because he was standing next to two very well-groomed young ladies, the contrast was stark. But the point I'm trying to make is that your team should look like a cohesive unit. And regardless of what you wear, look professional, deliver professional, because you want your presentation to be memorable.
And you don't want your appearance to distract from your presentation. And I think that's very important. What do you want to be remembered for? Your content or your appearance?
Awesome. We have a question here for our judges.
Regarding the chairman's presentation, would you suggest a more comprehensive visual prop or a more simple prop and more just talking?
I think you should use the prop that you can use most effectively to present your message. But let me give you a couple of pointers. One is that if you're bringing a poster into the room, which many teams do, it has to be readable. Remember that you're going to be standing 15 to 20 feet away from the judges, and remember, these are old eyes, okay? I have to be able to read it, and so that we can understand what it is, and you should also refer to it. Don't stand there with a poster in your hand that you never refer to. Now, some teams use video presentations either on a laptop. I've seen teams come in with a television that was already running, which is a good use of time. And those can be effective. Particularly, we've seen teams in the past actually use the video as a timing mechanism. The presenters know where they are in their presentation to get to their 7-minute deadline or completion by using the video as a pacing tool. Okay, what I would encourage you not to do is come in and start a video and then give a presentation that's not in some way related to the video. Because then the judges are wondering, am I supposed to be listening to you or am I supposed to be looking at that video? You know, you need to be, it needs to be cohesive. If you use any kind of a prop, it needs to be blended and woven in with your actual spoken presentation. Because the judges are going to tend to listen to what you're saying and kind of tune out all the other things. So if you have a poster, refer to it and make sure I can read it.
Also your video should not, if you bring in a video, it should not be your presentation. And we've had that, so just use it as an accessory.
Okay, great. We have a question for teams.
In a typical year, what does your chairman's presentation like prep look like?
So the year for those who don't know, a couple years ago we decided that after you win the chairman's award, 5 years can go by and then you can submit again. So I worked with our team this year to get our presentation up, and we did exactly what we did in 2006, which was you sit down with the whole team and you figure out what makes the team, and then we wove it into a presentation. So I'm sure y'all are doing that. Then we just practiced nonstop all day, every day. To this day, I can probably recite my entire Chairman's Award presentation, and I'm pushing 30. So you need to know your material. It doesn't matter what the presentation looks like if you know your material backwards and forwards. I don't know how many of you know Big Al, the inspector. Now imagine 8 hours with Big Al on the bus explaining 10 years of Wild Sting history to you. Because that's what we did. And we made sure that every student on the team that would come in contact with, whether it be a Chairman's Award judge, a regular judge, or Johnny from the street that came in to talk to us, we could all talk about the team and the team history because we knew it. So it wasn't knowing the presentation word for word, which albeit it was a little bit. It was knowing the story behind it too. So even if you got lost, you could just pick up right where you left off and fill it in with more information.
I don't know if your question was in regards to the entire submission or just the presentation, but from our perspective in 2010, we kind of put together the essay in I guess, like a standard way, but we peppered in a couple things related to our theme of Daisy. And we used the essay as kind of like our cold facts, like serious talk, like essay fact area. And then we used the video as the visual impact, right? So we talked about things like our DVD resource we had at the time, how we had been to London. We saved the video for all the high impact visuals, and we fortunately did a good job of doing the documentation part that we had just talked about earlier with the photos and the videos. And it was really a year-long process, right? So we had a team of students working on the written submission pretty much all year round, and they were very hard on themselves when it came to the editing. And then for the video, we had a pretty strong media team, and again, it was like highly scrutinized for many months. And then the presentation, it was similar. We had people, and then we had backup people, and those people met for many hours every day for a very long time.
Another thing that you'd like to do is practice a lot. Do your presentations for different groups of people so that they can understand what it is that you're trying to say. Get feedback, honest feedback from them so you can improve, whether it's your presentation skills, your message, whatever it is that you're doing. And try to have a chairman's team sit down and look at what you're doing. Give them a presentation. They will give you honest and open feedback.
The other thing that would help out a lot is make your presenters feel a little bit uncomfortable. So if you have the school superintendent in there, make them do it for the school superintendent, because you never know what you're going to walk into when you walk into that room. You don't know who you're going to see, you don't know what's going to happen, and they're going to feel real nervous. So make them feel nervous at home at your school. Make them do it on the bus on the way somewhere. Make them do it for old students. Make them do it for teachers. Make them do it for your regional director. Just make them do it over and over again.
Another thing I remember too is that we also kind of tried to gather as many questions as we thought the judges might ask them. And we spent many hours like pummeling them with these questions and going along what she said, making them feel uncomfortable, you know, making sure that every single person could answer all the questions that we thought might be asked. We also worked on, the people that we chose had different subject matter areas, right? So there might have been someone who was involved in robot, build, but also someone that was more involved in like community outreach. And we made sure that they worked well as a unit and they understood what their subject matter, was, and also how they could pass to each other. So they didn't feel uncomfortable interrupting another person, that didn't appear awkward when another person stepped in to say, oh, I can address that issue, here's, yada, yada. So really getting that teamwork down as well was important.
Kirsten actually just reminded me of something. For those of you who don't know, Team 27 Rush actually wrote down every single question a judge has ever asked them in the judges' room. It's a really great resource, whether you're trying to prepare the students, whether you're trying to prepare for the Chairman's Award, or even prepare yourselves for what questions you could get from judges in your pit. It's very helpful. We use it to train some of our new students, so I think that's a great resource as well. We have another question over here for our judges and our teams.
So with every chairman's interview I've ever been to, we typically get the same feedback, but in two different forms. We either get, you have too many numbers and not enough personal stories, or your personal stories take too long and you don't have enough numbers. And the same presentation can literally get the exact opposite feedback event to event. So for the teams, how do you decide how much statistics versus personal info you put in? And for the judges, how do the judges look at personal info versus statistics and decide what's too much, what's too little?
What, you expect us to be consistent? I appreciate the problem that you're describing, but I think in a lot of ways what you're really speaking to is the fact that there are hundreds of Chairman's Award judges throughout the country and throughout the world, and the questions can be as unique as the judges. Some judges want to quantify things and understand the stats. Other judges have more of an interest in the human impact side of how your team's culture has really affected your students and your community. And I really, I know this isn't going to be a helpful answer, but really you're seeing the personality differences among the judges, frankly. I think that any number you throw out, you need to be able to back up and be clear. Sometimes the numbers come flying at the judges so fast and furious that we can't digest it all. And that's a problem. And if all you do is tell personal stories, you go to the other extreme, tell stories about how you've impacted one or two students or how you've impacted the community, the judges may not get the big picture of your whole team. So probably balance is really what you need to strive for.
I think also there's something to be said about integrating the two. A lot of the times in any medium, people use numbers and they just kind of beat people over the head with them, and the message doesn't get across. But if you can back the numbers up with a story, which could be a personal anecdote, then you've tied it together in a more efficient package that's really telling the full story. And just like the same thing, if your presentation is just littered with personal anecdotes, maybe you can then back it up with the numbers, say, well, this many students have been affected this way, or that sort of thing. But I think it's almost unfair to expect 200 different chairman's judges across the globe to try and come to exact same consensus on a balance between numbers and stories.
Yeah, I think one of the myths is that judging is scientific and can be reduced to specific numbers and specific reactions. That's not true. Judging still has a subjective element to it. And what I hear in your getting the response on both sides is what Bill said is balance. That it may be that in the messages that you got, you need to pay attention to both sides of those messages and look at the balance and look at how do those, either the numbers and or the stories, show impact, which comes back to what Bill said earlier, because being impactful is one of the things that we look for consistently. And so if it's not being illustrated as being impactful, then maybe the answer is not looking at numbers or stories. It's looking at how does impact get illustrated. And coming back to what people said about practicing, that's one of the things you might ask people to look for in your presentation is, do they recognize impact out of how you've presented?
I think sometimes where the confusion comes in also is if in your essay you use words like we mentor many, you use the word many or a lot. That to me is like the word et cetera, that you can put in any number that you want. So the questions that then may come about by a judge would be, I need some quantification here. That's really kind of where we really have to hone in on the quantifying of it. And so many doesn't mean anything. So we need to hear numbers, and then we also need to hear, okay, is that today? Is that this year? Or is it over the last 5 years? So we need a lot more of the quantification. The story is a wonderful thing, but yet at the same time, we need to have that quantification as well.
Okay, great. We have a question specifically for our judges.
How do you determine what type of questions you ask the students?
Some of it is by looking at the essay and looking at the presentation, and most of us pre-read the essays and look and see if there are questions that we have that we specifically want to ask of the team. And one that's been coming up a lot lately is that there will be an event where 5 or 6 teams are involved in it, and you'll see 3 or 4 submissions that all say they started it. So the question may be, who really started it? What was the percentage of involvement? Some of those kinds of things. So sometimes the questions come out of the essays, but the general questions are trying to get at impact and the comprehensive nature of the team's understanding of and purveying of the values of FIRST.
Most all judges read through the essays before they get here. They're supposed to, and I think almost all of them do. And when I read through the essays, I will go through and write question marks after every place where I have a question. So to be honest, the questions you're going to get from the judges are almost always clarifying questions from things that they've seen in the essay that they either don't understand or they want to learn more about it because it maybe piqued their interest and they want to understand the nuance behind it, or something that you've said in your presentation that in the same way needs some clarification or amplification. So there are no canned questions. If there were, the chairman's judges would ignore them anyway. We're really asking questions that are responsive to your presentation, so our questions are going to be as unique as the presentation.
Awesome. We have a question for our teams.
So one of the pieces of feedback we got from our judges this year was that they wanted more what we did this year, because we submitted chairmans for the past 2 years, and the year before they told us to talk more about our long-term impact. So when you do your presentations and your essays, how do you balance talking about your story in general and like specific events or developments that you guys achieved this year?
I can tell you what we did. We sort of planned it out this way. Judges, in our essay, here's what we've done in the past, really short. Judges, here's what we're doing right now with details. And judges, here's where we're going. And that's what we put in our essay.
As a team, we've been trying to work on things that are sustainable and we're able to do for years to come. So I think it might help if you take some of the objectives you're tackling now and figuring out long-term solutions to them. So there's no longer in the past, we're currently working on a project that we've been working on for the last 5 years. Wildstang does this thing called Miss Maker Faire, for example. It's a maker fair for girls that want to get involved in STEM, and we started years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, and we've been tracking how well it's going. So now our 3 to 4 year outreach is still a current outreach. So it kind of tackles the same thing at once.
I can reassure you that you're not the only person that's ever received that feedback and been frustrated by it. This was a big point actually on our team when we were submitting in 2010. It was very confusing to us because we received feedback, and even now we get asked, so what's new this year? And as a team, we just kind of decided that that question wasn't really relevant or important to us because, as was mentioned about sustainability, our motto or our mantra now is sustained excellence. So as a team, we decided that we're not going to drop an effort and start a new one just because we think it's the flashiest, most gimmicky thing like we could do. We think it's more important that if you start something and it's making an impact, that you continue with it and that you're making it as successful as you can. So I don't know if that really helps you, but hopefully I can relate to that as well. Yeah.
One of our essayists, actually it was the first or second year we submitted a Chairman's Award entry. Her closing comment, which has stuck with me now for 15 years, was every year we're a new team. Seniors leave and freshmen come in. And we have to figure out what kind of impact they're going to make on the team and what kind of impact we're going to make on them. The answers to those questions might be some of the sustaining because it's not the same group every year. And we struggle now because we've been, Hall of Fame for a number of years. How do we make it impactful to our present students? So it's not something that just you folks are struggling with, we are too. How do we keep this thing alive? How do we keep growing? And how do we keep making a difference in FIRST? So we're all in this kind of together.
Okay, great. We have a question back here for our judges. Do you prefer watching presentations with props or without props?
Depends on the props.
Yes. No, quite seriously, I think we talked about props before. If they are appropriate and truly illustrate what you're doing and fit in and don't sort of stand out as being, why are they doing that? Then it's fine, but you don't have to have a prop to have an effective presentation.
I agree with that statement. We've already covered this. So the other thing that I would want to add is that if you're going to use a prop, it should be effective. We've covered that. But I would encourage teams to spend a lot of time on polishing their delivery, because what you say weighs more in the judge's mind than what you have on a poster. And by that, I mean the judges appreciate a presentation that stops right at 7 minutes, because that tells us that you've really practiced your presentation and it's really together. And I mentioned earlier about some teams that use props as pacing aids. The other common mistakes that teams make in presentation is they talk too fast. You cannot tell me your entire team history in 7 minutes, and you shouldn't try to. You need to focus on the key items that you really want the judges to pay attention to. And again, what makes you stand out, what makes you unique, what makes you better. To go back to the previous question, I would put a lot of emphasis on the last couple of years and maybe spend 1 minute talking about past history. Because unlike all the other judged awards, with this award, we truly are interested in your history. Sustained performance, sustained excellence is important. Where with almost all the other judged awards, if it was more than 18 to 24 months ago, we don't care. And that's because a lot of teams tend to rest on their laurels. They had a couple of really good years, and the kids that did those things are not even on the team anymore. They've graduated. But in this venue, in this particular award, we are definitely interested in your history, but you got to have balance and use your time wisely. Don't try to tell me everything you've ever done in 7 minutes. If you're not speaking at a normal conversational pace, I'm going to have trouble understanding you, because when you start talking quickly, your diction drops off. It becomes more difficult to understand. And also the judges can only consume facts and figures so quickly. You know, it's like drinking from a fire hose. So I would encourage you to practice your presentations for a normal conversational pace and get your key message in with that pacing in 7 minutes.
Okay, great. We have another question for our teams.
Everyone, I just had a question about how you all put together your chairman's teams, like when you do that. I think we're kind of a newer team, and I think we struggle a little bit with, I guess, getting kids to be excited about doing awards. It sounds like they have to dedicate a good amount of their time to that, and I think everybody kind of comes in wanting to do a technical role. So how do you motivate kids, and how do you, and what other roles, are they mostly dedicated to the Chairman's Award, or do they also have kind of other roles on the team?
One of the things that we do, even though we don't have a chairman's submission every year, but we do have students who talk to judges in the pit, we decide who does that on a few things. One, do you take a leadership role on the team? Can you talk really well to people? Can you tell our story? Do you understand the history? So those are the things that we look at when we select students to talk to judges. However, we've extended that to the rest of our team. Most of our team can actually talk to judges, which has been something that we've struggled with, but we've really pushed for that this year, so that if a student is in the stands and a judge or anyone comes up and starts asking questions, that they can truly answer them.
We're lucky enough to have a very large team, so we split our team up like a business. So we have your technical students and your non-technical students, and what really drives students to want to submit for Chairman's Award or submit for other awards that are available is we make it very important, and we make them at their own little time, like the stars of the team. We let the team know how important it is to believe in the mission of the Chairman's Award and to change everything like around us and really make our community a better place. So by putting them as the front runners and ambassadors of the team, it really helps encourage more students to become involved.
I think as with anything on your team, like especially with culture, it's a very top-down, right? So your adults and your coaches really have to lead by example and really put the impetus on the importance of the awards so that the students really understand that it's something that they really need to try hard on. I think a lot of team culture is top-down. That's all I have.
All right. We have this booklet we call our family album. And when we get new kids on our team, we introduce the family album to the new people, which is it's like a yearbook, but it's a yearbook of all the things that we've done in the past. And again, this gets ingrained into our kids. You can't be in the pit area unless you know the team's history. And at some point, we can figure out who would be a good representation to be in the pit area, who could speak to judges and they're not afraid. They can tell our story. They're articulate. So everyone like everyone else says, everyone knows our team's story, but you probably want the best speaker or the most confident person in the pit area or who goes into the judges' room to represent your team.
Our first Chairman's Award presentation was done by the same young woman I mentioned a few minutes ago without the adults' knowledge. She came to us a week before the competition and said, I need 2 other students. I need to prep them for a Chairman's Award presentation. And we were amazed. We didn't know we put one in, but she had entered one because she felt we had a personality and we weren't telling our story. And so for 3 years, she led that group. She recruited, and she was an amazing leader. She's now a media specialist for the New England Patriots, but she still won't get me tickets. But anyway, so, and we also use personality tests. We give a personality test to all our adults and all our kids, and we talk to them about what it means if you're comfortable talking on your feet, what it means if you need a minute to reflect. And both of those have some aspects that can be very effective in a presentation, but it's more about knowing yourself and knowing how that interacts with a group of people. So once again, go back to what your team is. Are you a bunch of nerds? Well, then you need somebody to help you flesh it out. Or do you have some people who flame on and are very effective at getting messages across? And use your strengths, and then find ways of improving those areas where you need improvement.
Okay, great. We have a question for our judges.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit with the chairman's prop conversations, but as far as the essay and the presentation, what are the pros and cons of having a creative theme, and what are the best ways to choose a theme to be the most effective?
I'm not sure that theme is not everyone does a theme for their essay. Sometimes it's just a straightforward, not quite data dump, maybe a little strong, but I don't think there are particular pros or cons to having a theme or not having one. I think it has to come back to the team culture, and whatever theme is there needs to be borne out in the rest of the information we get for the team. So it's not something you pick to do for Chairman's Award, but it's something that fits your culture and something that the team can buy into. Then I think it's okay. If it's not, then if it's manufactured for the Chairman's Award, it's going to show up somewhere. There will be a crack, and that theme will become more of a liability than a benefit.
There's some things that I'm hearing not only this year, but in past years as well, and with other teams from our area, that sometimes teams are doing things for chairmans. And I think that whole process really needs to have a second thought. You need to be doing this because this is part of changing the culture of the world, of your community. It's not to get the award. And the award is the bonus for everything that you've done. So when I'm hearing about themes, if the theme is relative to you, you know, like whatever you want to call it, that's what makes you, your team, and that's that's kind of like your branding. Wonderful, go for it. You know, use that, but use it because it gives you the energy of your team, not because it's to get the award. It's not, we're doing this for chairmans or we're doing this for chairmen. That's not the reason to do it. Then we're missing the whole point. Then this award really doesn't mean anything if that's what you're doing it for. It's got to have some soul to it. So think about really, why are you doing this? If the goal of chairmans really, and the goal of this whole FIRST is to change the culture and to make people aware of the need for science and technology, for STEM, for STEAM, however many letters we want to add to it. The point of it is that we have to think about what are our teams doing to change that culture. That's your brand, and that's your theme. And that's where I think we really have to go, or we're really missing the boat here. We're becoming very superficial then, and then we don't have longevity, and we don't have any sustainability to really anything of value. So think about where you want to put your value.
The one thing that I want to add to that is that sometimes the essay will be arranged by topics, and personally, I find that to be very helpful. The essays can be difficult to read just by virtue of how they come to us through the FIRST portal. It's just it's a string of words, and there's also occasionally some issues with punctuation that doesn't translate down through the system. Not because your essay wasn't right, but because the system dropped it. And you're reading along thinking, this is a really long sentence, and then you realize, well, that's actually 2 or 3 sentences. So anything that you can do to block off topical areas, and sometimes a theme plays into that, it increases the readability of the essay. I personally appreciate that. And a theme can be effective as a way to tell your story. So again, to make your presentation memorable. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool for how you tell your story. The judges are most interested in what is the story and the content that underlies it.
Okay, great. We have another question for our judges back here.
Hi. I was just wondering if you could touch on how the essays versus the presentations kind of compare in terms of importance.
I don't think it's a compare. They're both important. The essay is your first introduction to the judges. So that is your, they say that you can never redo your first impression. So your essay is your first impression on the judges, and your presentation is your second impression on the judges. So you get 2 shots at it. Both of them are important. And so I don't think contrast is actually something that we look at.
That's right, I agree with that. And the one thing that I would point out is that your presentation needs to be consistent with your write-up. Certainly I should be seeing the same things, or hearing and reading the same thing. But I would encourage you to really pay attention to the mandatory questions that come before your essay. Your presentation ideally should address those subjects very thoroughly. I guess that's it.
Great. We have a question for our teams and/or our judges.
So year after year, as you continue to, with your submissions, how do you find a way to keep your submissions new? So once you already have the essay structure, you've done the presentations, even as you're doing more outreach, even if it's in the same specific areas, how do you find a way to present it or add on to your essay without it just there being able to look at your history and see, wow, it's practically identical, even with different outreach opportunities?
Do you want to hear from the judges or the teams on that?
Well, I mean, I guess the teams are the ones who are making the submissions.
So unfortunately, we don't have, I can't speak as someone that has entered year after year after year. We were fortunate enough to win the second time that we presented. That being said, we started resubmitting. So we're starting to see that we're, instead of, I believe the judges stated earlier that you don't want to rest on your laurels. So instead of sitting there and going that we did XYZ 10 years ago, we kind of use that as a bouncing off point. So instead of saying, oh, we used to host the Wild Staying FLL regional, well, that's great for FLL teams. We wanted to do more one-on-one, so now we do Miss Maker Faire where we're directly working with the students. So we're kind of linking what we do today to what we did in the past, and we use it as a launching point or a segue into the new, like the segue from the old to the new. I hope that helps. I'm sorry.
Anyone else?
Clearly, this is a difficult question, but I mean, one of the things you could do is try to take the feedback form and the feedback that you get from the previous year and try to rework it that way.
I think when it comes to the essay, and this is kind of answering, kind of not, one thing that kind of helps, that can help you structure things in a little bit different light, and we kind of touched on this earlier, was have somebody read it that has no understanding of first. And then A, you'll get a lot of questions out of that, and B, you'll see what you need to clarify. All right, we have another, go ahead.
One of the things that we try to impress on our students who are preparing the presentation or the essay was that there are kind of two different groups. I mean, when you do any kind of presentation, you have to identify your customer. Well, first off, within your local area, the judges, there's probably a good shot that they know you, that they've seen some of your things. They've been to some of your events, either directly or on a peripheral nature. But then you walk into this place, and the judges here, they're from all over the country, maybe all over the world. So they haven't seen you before. They don't know you. And that means, one, I think you need to be more outgoing, as I said earlier, flame on, tell your story, tell the impact that it's had on your team and maybe personally. But you really have to realize that, like I say, there are, I think, two different presentations you have to prepare. Maybe not in content that much, but definitely, I think, in style.
Okay, great. We have a question for the teams.
Hello. The question I have is on your structure in terms of kind of how you put yourselves together. And do you have, in per se, and I don't want to call it a chairman's team, it's not the presenters, but it's a group that's dedicated to figuring out which activities you can plan that would have the biggest impact. So it kind of tags off of what Ruth said in the idea of doing things for chairmans. Have any of you actually structured yourselves so that you have a team that looks at things that way, or has it just been more organic in the activities that have come up that have given the most impact?
We had a team of 90 kids, so we separated into different types of sub-teams, and one of the sub-teams was outreach. Outreach is code for chairmans, because we didn't want to come out there and be like, we have a chairman sub-team, we want to win. So we had outreach. What outreach does is they do all of our awards, and they do outreach because we are not trying to win chairmans, we are trying to do outreach and help other people. It just so happens that the more outreach you do, the better off you have a chance at getting chairman's award. So that's how we structure it on Wild Staying.
My 2 cents, it was kind of my understanding that no one wins a chairman's award. The chairman's award is earned. You know, it's earned by consistency. It's earned by who tells the best story. As far as your team organization, you know, I've got 40 plus kids on my team. we have the technical side and the non-technical side. So we have the non-technical side we call the administration / the operations team, and each kid is put on a technical team and a non-technical team. And then again, I think I've said it before, that eventually we figure out who are the best speakers, who are the best representatives in the pit area, and that's kind of how we decide, okay, you're going to be on our chairman's team.
Okay, I believe we have a question up here for our teams.
So I was just wondering, so when it comes to making the chairman's script or something like that, do you usually give your presenters like a set script that they should memorize, or general points with key ideas that they can expand on themselves?
I think we touched on that a little bit. If anyone has anything additional to
Can you
what we said.
repeat the question? We couldn't hear it.
You said about the chairman's scripts. Do you give them something to memorize, or is it kind of freewheeling, for lack of a better word? I think we touched on that a little bit earlier. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add.
We started with an outline that was made up by a larger group, but then the presentation team took that and developed their own script, and then we practiced it, giving feedback, and we brought in, local community people who they maybe didn't know, to make them uncomfortable, as somebody said, and then there was feedback to the students. But I mean, yeah, we gave them an outline, but they had to develop their own script, and then they memorized it and practiced it over and over and over again, so that they would be able to hit that mark of X number of minutes, so that they were done by the time 7 minutes was up. I think it was 5 back then. But that might,
The one thing that I would add to that is that the judges appreciate a fluid conversational presentation. Some teams will come in and the presenters are reading from a script, and that doesn't have the polish that we would like to see at this level. Sometimes you can tell that the presenter is truly just reciting memorized lines, and it comes across very cold and canned. A practiced presenter will maybe memorize the lines, but will be able to deliver it in almost a conversational way, so that you're just relaxed, having a conversation with some friends. And yes, the judges are your friends. And it's not just cold canned reciting lines or reading lines from a paper. Just a kind of a smoothly delivered conversation is the best presentation style.
And I would just add to that, your presenters need to then be able to answer questions. So if they go in with a canned script and are not flexible enough to then know how to deal with the second or third level questions, it's not going to work in your team's favor. So the presenters need to know their material, but they also need to know your team and your culture so that they can answer the questions.
Okay, great. We have another question for our judges. If our teams would like to chime in on this one, that's great too. Just as a formality, we'll probably take just one more question after this.
Hi, so our team has we started taking chairman seriously on our team about 4 years ago. And we have recently been giving out handouts to the judges based on our presentation. So we give like a booklet with the pictures from our presentation board and kind of incorporating our theme into that. What are your guys' opinions as judges on when you get those from teams? What do you think, if it's a good idea or not?
Your question was about handout materials? Okay. This kind of falls into one of the myths of the Chairman's Award. You come into the room and you usually deliver us 2 or 3 notebooks that are 5 inches thick. The reality is the judges that you're presenting to will never look at those books. Okay, when you leave the room, we have 8 minutes to discuss your presentation, to evaluate your team before the next team comes in. So you might ask the question, then why do we prepare these books? And here's why. each of the 3 judge rooms at this facility, at this event, will bubble up to the final analysis, probably 2 teams. So there will be, from 39 teams, we will get down to about 6 finalist teams. In the finalist discussion that all 9 judges will participate in, 2/3 of your judges have not seen your presentation. So those notebooks are very important for the 2/3 of the judges who didn't have the benefit of seeing your presentation to very quickly come up to speed on your team. So the best notebooks that you can bring us are not really scrapbooks, but are actually very well organized presentations in themselves. That is, they should have a table of contents, they should have tabs, so that a judge who's looking for a piece of information can go to the table of contents, find the subject, flip to that tab, and read about your team. What those books are doing is selling your team to judges who have heard about your team but haven't seen your presentation. So when you're putting that together, always think about that's really the communication you're trying to effect here. What you can do to help the judges that you're actually presenting to is leave them with a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with maybe a dozen bullet points on it that are the key points you want us to remember about your team. Because when we get into deliberations within that room, the 13 teams or something that each room is going to look at, that one piece of paper helps us to remember your presentation. Oh, this is the team that did this, they did this, they did this. Their team started so many years ago, they've got this many students, this is their gender balance, this is their outreach. Just give us a dozen key points that you think are really important about your team. And then the notebooks will be evaluated by the next higher evaluation process should your team bubble up to that level.
Okay, great. We have one last question for our judges. We touched upon this question a little bit, but it's good that we circle back.
So we were just wondering how judges go around and verify what teams are saying in terms of if they're giving the right information in their presentation or not.
On the chairman's level, we don't actually. We read your essays and we see your presentation. We don't go out into the pits and talk to you. We don't ask other judges because this process is isolated a little bit. So it's fact-checking. If we see something as we're reading the essays that we believe needs to be fact-checked, we will fact-check before we get here. But hopefully on a chairman's submission, we don't see anything we believe needs to be fact-checked.
Now, I don't know if all Chairman's Award judges do this or not, but for the 13 teams that I read, I've looked at your website, I've looked at your social media, I've looked at your Twitter feed, so I've tried to get a feel for your team before I even get here. But in general, we can't verify every fact and figure. We verify things that or we'll look into things that concern us. Earlier in this session, we talked about the situation where more than one team claims to have had the founding idea for an initiative. To be honest, that happens often, and it happened as recently as last week. And in those cases, yes, the judges do have to ask around and do some research. We really don't like to do that because it is supposed to be a very contained process. But when you have multiple teams making the same claim, we have to get to the bottom of that. But that's about the extent of the fact-checking that we do.
Okay, great. Do any of our panelists have any last comments or suggestions for any of our teams? Awesome. I'll take silence as golden. If any of you, like Kelly said, have any questions, some of us may stick around, please come talk to us. We can try and answer your questions. Stop by our Hall of Fame booth, visit our websites, find our pits. There's gold balloons above each of the Hall of Fame team pits. And have a great day. Thanks, guys.